In today's lecture, we're going to be focusing on prenatal development. So we're going to be touching on the 3 trimesters, germinal, embryonic, and fetal periods. And you'll notice that on the next slide, I have a couple different videos linked, and I encourage you to watch those just to support your understanding of today's topic. During the germinal period, which is about 0 or conception through 2 weeks, we see that this is when rapid cell division is happening. So a zygote or a fertilized egg begins to duplicate and divide within hours after conception. So about a day to a day and a half, we start to see this happening. And we see that the fertilized egg or zygote begins to move down the uterine wall. And during this time, about half of conceptions do fail to grow or implant properly, and then they do not survive beyond that 2-week period. We also see that majority of these organisms are grossly abnormal, and we see that about 31% of all zygotes do end up growing and surviving to become living newborn babies, but consider that the germinal period is only the first 2 weeks and the full pregnancy is roughly about 40 weeks, so that's why we only see about 31% moving forward through all 3 trimesters. We also need to note that this happens after the process of meiosis, and this is something that occurs within the first 10 days after conception. And we also see that during this time period, this is when the placenta starts to form. So the placenta is a temporary organ that helps to connect the fetus to the uterine wall. And we see that the placenta provides nutrients and oxygen to the fetus so that they can get everything that they need during the 3 phases of pregnancy. And we also see that there is an amniotic sac and umbilical cord. So the umbilical cord will connect the embryo during the embryonic period to the placenta. And then the amniotic sac is basically the fluid that will end up protecting the fetus over the time period of pregnancy. And this in turn, when you're about to give birth, that's kind of what happens is your amniotic sac or that fluid protecting the fetus ends up breaking. And this is kind of what we typically call the water break, but we'll talk about that more later. During the embryonic period, this is when the embryo attaches to the uterine wall. So there is success within the germinal period of proper implantation. And we see that during this time period, this is when the beginning stages of all life-sustaining supports are developed and the basic forms of all body structures begin. And so we see this in how the embryo starts to develop its cell layers, so the endoderm, the mesoderm, and the ectoderm. And you'll see that I've included a little image here that kind of talks about that. So the endoderm is basically going to help to form your liver, your stomach, and your lungs. Your mesoderm is helping you with your muscles, bones, heart, and circulatory systems. And then your ectoderm is helping you with your central nervous system, skin, hair, nails, and teeth. And these are formed within both the embryonic period and the fetal period. So there's stages as to when there's going to be full formation of each of these outer layers of the cells. We do also see that we have a 20% result in embryo abortion during the embryonic period. So again, within 3 to 8 weeks is when we see that there is a 20% rate of abortion happening. And this can be caused for many different reasons. There are more common abortions due to chromosomal abnormalities. However, there are other factors that may be the result of an abortion. This could be due to environmental factors. This could be due to just ability to sustain a pregnancy over a long period of time. We do also see that 1 in 5 pregnancies do end in miscarriages during the embryonic period, and this could be due to reoccurring genetic areas of issues. So this happens within about the first 3 months. During the embryonic period, we also do see some significant changes within the cephalon-caudal or head-to-toe formation, as well as the proximal distal or middle to outward formation of the embryo. So we see around the first 3 to 4 weeks that the embryo is about 3 millimeters long, and then as they grow into the 7th, 8-week mark, they are about 2 centimeters long. And as you can see from the image here, we also start to see the first stage of toe formation, and that bottom image there, kind of you can see the little toes that are being formed. Also, we see that there is a significant change within what is being developed. So we start to see the more formation of the actual fetus taking shape. And so once we start to get into 7 to 8 weeks, this is when the head is forming, eyes, ears, nose, mouth, and digestive system are starting to form. And really around the first 3 to 4 weeks, this is just when our sex organs, our heart begins to pulsate. And so we see more significant increases in the formation of an actual fetus at around 8 weeks. And this is when we go from talking about an embryo at 7 to 8 weeks to when we get into the fetal period. This is when we switch to the reference of how we talk about the pregnancy. During the first 2 to 8 weeks during the embryonic period and even after into the fetal period, we do see that harmful teratogens are most likely to impact the growing body and functioning of the brain. So these teratogens are any agents or conditions such as bacteria, viruses, drugs, or alcohol that are within the body and could impact the growing embryo or fetus. And we see that these are harmful and it impacts prenatal brain development, and then this leads to potential intellectual and emotional disabilities and delays, as well as this could result in birth defects or complications, as well as structural abnormalities that are present at birth. And so I do have a link here of a video that kind of showcases the impact of these harmful teratogens and kind of what that looks like. So make sure to kind of take a peek at that to see that this is a critical period for the development of organs that are starting to form, and this is the time frame that we have to be most considerate of when brain development is occurring. During the fetal period, or the last part of pregnancy from 9 weeks all the way to birth, we see rapid growth happening. So on average, we see that within 3 months, the fetus is growing 3 ounces and also 3 inches. We also see that there is the refining of the cell layers, so that the outer cell layers of the endoderm, mesoderm, and ectoderm that were beginning within the embryonic period, we see that the fetus is now starting to have more gradual function on their own, and those organs are starting to become much more refined. So this includes the fingernails, the toenails, the buds for teeth start to form, even our eyelashes and hair starts to grow during this time. We also see that our digestive and excretory systems, so our kidneys, our bladder, and our urethra are starting to be formed at this time. And we can also see on ultrasounds, we can start to begin to see sex organs. And so ultrasounds are just high frequency sound waves that help to display images of human anatomy. And so this produces a sonogram image. It's kind of similar to an X-ray, but it uses sound waves instead of radiation. And so this is common within the 3rd month to start getting an ultrasound done and being able to actually see the sex organs. So around 11 weeks is kind of the beginning place at where you might see the sex organs. And you can kind of see with this image here, a typical way to kind of know for a boy is if a caudal notch is pointing upward. Now again, you may get some results that kind of differ, and it kind of just depends on the positioning of the fetus, but this is that time period when you can start to see on the ultrasounds the sex of the fetus. We see that during the fetal period, this is when majority of the functions of the brain are starting to occur. So this is when neurogenesis, so different neurons within the brain are starting to be formed, and then synaptogenesis are when different neural connections are happening between one another. We also see the formation of the brain follows a proximal distal sequence. So again, that's looking from our middle to outward, and I have included kind of an image to show, just the formation of the brain at different weeks. So we see that full term is going to be about 38 to 40 weeks, and we can see kind of the progression from 25 days to 38 weeks of what that looks like. We also see that during this time, up to 500,000 brain cells per minute are created, and we also see that the body starts to have basic bodily functions within the central nervous system. So we see that there is more rapidness within 4 to 6 months of the central nervous system. And then this is going to carry out after birth as well. So major functions of controlling breathing, temperature, all of those are important to consider. So you can see that in the last 3 months, a lot is happening. And so we see again that the central nervous system is starting to pick up and allow the fetus to function on its own and get prepared for birth. And so we see that there's expansion and contraction of the lungs. We also see that there's the final maturation of the heart valves as well as arteries and veins. And so this is why it's important within the last 3 months to have regular checkups to ensure that all of those vital organs and systems within the body are functioning properly. We also see that this is extensive time for the growth of the cortex within the brain, and as well as just a few fun facts about when we see things start to pick up speed is that around 25 weeks, we can see that the fetus starts to move to the rhythm of a drum beat, and within 25 to 30 weeks, they know the rhythm and tone of their mother's voice. We also see that around 22 to 36 weeks, this is when the fetus can actually start to cry and grunt. We see them sucking their thumbs. We see them moving. They can understand and produce feelings. So some of these things we may feel within our bodies, as well as being able to see thumb sucking on ultrasounds, for example. And then we see that around 30 weeks, this is when there is age of viability. So this is when they are ready to live outside the womb. And so we'll talk about that on the next slide. So age of viability, this is around 30 weeks, and this means that the fetus is ready to live outside of the womb because they have had all of those important growing organs ready to go during the time of when they were inside of the womb. And so we see that this is when, unfortunately, we do still see that there is a 5% rate of abortions or stillborn babies. And so that is when there is a baby that is born dead after 22 weeks, and these are just some survival rates that you may see. So at 22 weeks, 23 to 24, and 28 weeks. And so the likelihood of survival is much higher once we get into the 28-week to 30-week mark. However, there still are some chances if a fetus is born before that 28-week mark that they could survive, but it is lower, with 22 weeks being under 30%. And we do see that this is also the age at which premature or preterm newborns may survive outside. So at 30 weeks, this is more of a likelihood of when there is going to be an increased survival rate. And so this is all I have for you today related to prenatal development. Keep in mind that this is just kind of an intro, more in your text if you wanted to get more detail regarding prenatal development. And then in the next chapter, we'll kind of talk a little bit more about birth.